Hello everyone, this is Miguel, the Movie Encyclopedia, signing in for a new review. For this episode, I'll be tackling the third installment in the famous Conjuring trilogy, The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, starring Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga. The highly anticipated sequel to the smash hit horror films The Conjuring and The Conjuring 2 brings audiences back into the world of Ed and Lorraine Warren, world-renowned demonologists and exorcists, who inadvertently get Arnie Johnson possessed by a satanic curse and proceed to investigate this curse in the lead up to the infamous trial of Arnie Cheyenne Johnson, the first known court case in the United States where the defendant pleaded not guilty upon the claim of demonic possession. The Conjuring Devil Made Me Do It features some great horror elements and striking visuals, but its story has a lot to be desired. The film definitely has some moments of greatness, but the overall story feels very uneven and probably could have used a lot more work before we got into the actual film. First, I want to talk about what I really enjoyed about this movie. The performances are fairly strong throughout. Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga are great as the Warrens once again. The husband and wife duo have to tackle a new threat unlike anything they have ever faced. And even though it's not Wilson and Farmiga's greatest performance as these horror icons, it's still solid performances from both of them, as you really feel like these are lived-in people with real-life problems and real-life emotions. Newcomers Ruari O'Connor, Sarah Catherine Hook, John Noble, and Julian Hilliard give solid performances throughout, but the movie does not spend enough time with any of their characters, resulting in a cast that never feels fully realized nor relatable like the characters from the first two Conjuring films. I really love that family from both the first and the second Conjuring movies because not only do they have great chemistry with Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga's Ed and Lorraine Warren, but they were just really fun, not fun, but really relatable and sometimes fun characters that you really want to root for. These characters just don't get enough screen time, which is really sad because all the performances in this movie are very solid. I think we could have had some really great characters in this film if only the writers had spent more time with the characters played by Ruari O'Connor, Sarah Catherine Hook, John Noble, and Julian Hilliard. It just never really fully realizes them, and that's just kind of a disappointment compared to the first two films. I honestly don't understand while watching this movie why people keep saying this movie has very little to no horror. Because even though this movie does not have as much horror as the first two Conjuring films, the scary elements of this film are just as terrifying and visually striking as the first two films, and usually are involved in the best scenes of the entire movie. The Devil Made Me Do It is not the scariest film in the overall Conjuring universe, but it's still horrifying when it wants to be, and there are definitely a few moments that are just either unbelievably creepy or just downright scary. I mean, we could have used maybe a little bit more horror elements to compare with the first two Conjuring films, but still, this movie I would definitely say is still a very scary movie. Now, this movie tries to develop a new kind of supernatural villain for the Warrens in an occultist who's obsessed with satanic curses. However, this occultist character is completely bland and 100% forgettable. This character just never really felt important whatsoever, and she had like no motive. She had no motive throughout the entire story, and it pisses me off because, the villains of the first two movies are, somewhat generic for a supernatural horror film, but they still had really strong motive, and they were still really terrifying characters, while the occultist character of this movie is not scary whatsoever, very bland, forgettable, has no personality, and worst of all, she just has no motive. I don't understand why she is so obsessed with performing satanic curses. I understand how she does it. I understand throughout later in the movie why she became a Satanist, but they never explain why she wants to do a satanic curse, why she wants to kill David Glatzel and Arnie Johnson. It never really makes sense to me, and I feel like that was a major disappointment. Also, the movie tries to develop a side story that focuses on the love between Ed and Lorraine Warren. But this story, which also involves Ed's failing health as he suffers a heart attack towards the beginning of the movie, feels like a really pale imitation of what they did in The Conjuring 2. The Conjuring 2 did a great job of focusing on their relationship, specifically how they came together and became world-renowned demonologists. But this movie just really focuses on kind of the same thing, honestly, with this weird side story about Ed being sick and having heart failure, which just never adds anything to the movie. I get what they're trying to do with the story between Ed and Lorraine, but the story with Ed and his heart problems literally serves no purpose in the movie aside for giving Ed a crutch during the more physical scenes. It was stupid and unnecessary. And also, they kept making the audience think that he's gonna die, even though anyone who knows the biography of Ed and Lorraine Warren knows that Ed Warren dies pretty much 25 years after the events of this story. So even though he's having heart problems, he's gonna be completely fine. So that whole story, the one thing it could have done is have tension, and it just doesn't, because historically, we know he's gonna be fine. So overall, The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It has some great elements in it, but sadly, everything else, specifically revolving around the story and the writing of the characters, is just so painfully poor compared to the first two Conjuring films, and that's a major disappointment. It doesn't make the movie terrible. It's not the worst Conjuring universe film, but it's definitely one of their weaker movies. I'm gonna give The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It a 6.5 out of 10 stars. This movie was just okay. Well, that's it for today's episode. Thank you all for watching. If you like this episode, make sure to subscribe to my channel, comment what you thought of this video, and make sure to share with friends. Make sure to follow Miguel the Movie Encyclopedia on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to get updates on new episodes and geek culture news. Speaking of which, if you want to hear me talk about geek culture news, including movies, TV shows, and video games, make sure to check out Miguel the Movie Encyclopedia podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you find your podcast episodes. I post episodes monthly talking about the biggest geek culture announcements and reviews of the previous month. Until next time, stay safe and see you then.